So we're going to have a discussion. In a sense, forget that I'm here, other than that I'm asking the questions. And let's see what develops. I've never done this before in front of a live audience of 80 people, but let's see where we go with this. Okay. Larry, thank you for turning up today. Much appreciated. You filled in at the last minute. Now, as I've already said to you, we are going to slightly go anywhere with this. All right. Now, how old were you at the time of the Rendlesham Forest incident?
19 years old.
Okay, and when did you actually start your basic training?
When I was 18 years old.
Okay, and where was that?
San Antonio, Texas.
Okay, and how many weeks?
6 weeks.
Okay.
And then there was the SPS, Security Forces Academy.
You might need to hold it a bit closer.
Security Forces Academy came after, and then it was Air Base Ground Defense before I came over here.
Okay, so let's just set the scene then. So you got your first posting overseas, which is?
Bentwaters.
Okay.
81st Tech Fighter Wing.
And when did you actually arrive on the base?
December 1st, 1980 in the morning. Arrived at Lake and Heath and took a bus down. It was a sunny day. There was snow on the ground. Remember it like yesterday.
Okay. Now, we've obviously chatted, so I know some of the things, but just bear with me. Right. Now, when you got to that base, was this in a sense your first job?
That was my first base. And, I was supposed to go to Alconbury.
Okay.
And this is a whole other story that, when you're younger, you know who I am, right? And I know a lot of you guys as friends anyway, so it's just be cool. I got nothing to sell you today, man. But they swapped assignments. It was like I got the wrong thing, and the military can't do anything government in 5 minutes. Can't have things changed in 5 minutes, and it was done for me. So I realize a lot of things are different now than maybe I did as a stupid kid. I was just out of high school, like many of us.
So would it be fair to say that in terms of being a young adult, this was pretty much your first overseas experience of any kind?
No, I'd gone to school in Essex as an exchange student in Billericay in 78 and 79, and then enlisted in the Air Force in 79, and then on a delayed entry kind of thing. And I brought in some friends of mine, the buddy system. And one of my friends, Jeff, went to Guam, and I ended up in, I was the last person in the U.S. Air Force. Because, it was not long after Saigon fell when I went in. People don't realize 4 years after Saigon when I enlisted. And it was not a popular thing to do. And I was in rock and roll bands and all my friends. And then going into the military was not the thing you did back then. And so and people forget it's that long ago. I mean, that's, So, but I did it, and I wanted to get out of the town I lived in, and I wanted to get on with the world, and I got the last country of choice, guaranteed country of choice, which was England, and because I was so blown away when I went to school here.
Yep.
And I liked the girlies. I thought they were pretty cool back then.
Not changed then. But,
Well, I could catch them back then.
Okay, so you get to the base. You had been abroad before, a couple of exchanges, that kind of thing. But you get to the base. Now, what a lot of people don't realise that there's actually many parallels between myself and Larry in terms of our military career, because we were both Air Force police. He was US Air Force police. I was RAF police. And he guarded nuclear weapons, and I guarded nuclear weapons. And when you first get to your base, what happens is that you basically, once you're on there, before they give you a gun and say you're on shift, you have to do some awareness training, get to local regulations, that kind of thing, how the base works. So it's kind of like a familiarization. Anybody that's been in the forces, when you start off anywhere, you go to a new unit, they kind of familiarize yourself, especially if you're raw out of training. So that would generally take how many weeks in the US? US Air Force,
when we got to Bentwaters, my first day, it's a funny story. See, this is different. Instead of having to go up and do your old hit from 30 years ago, because there's so much more to this. This involved people, real people, and a guy I don't even know no more. I'm 52 years old, and I was, I've been public with this thing since I was 22 years old. So in my head, I'm not even that guy from the old, Tim, you remember BBC Breakfast Time. I don't know who that guy was, anymore. But he was a lot younger. But we got on the base, and I'm like, well, this is kind of... I was picked up by Bud Steffens, who was involved in the incident on the first night. He was a relay officer. And they took us, he said, well, here's all the great stuff to see. There's the bowling alley. And he goes, if you want to do anything fun on the base, there's the bowling alley. And it was all the bowling alley. And if you want a good hamburger, it was the bowling alley. And I'm like, oh, man, because I don't bowl, and I know the shirts and the shoes. And that was all they had. There was no Burger Kings. There was none of the stuff the bases eventually had way after my day. And... So my first night, I was in with this kind of hillbilly from Alabama someplace, and he was in. We were sharing a room, so you're kind of forced in the dorms with people from. I'm a New York guy, and we're totally different. He's like, "Hey, where part of New York you from? Don't you be stealing my mail?" I'll never forget that. I'm like, "Shut up." So we're in this deathly bad mauve-colored room with bad curtains, and I get in, the door starts banging at about 1 in the morning. It was the night of December 1st, 1980, and they're saying, grab your alert gear. It was Lee Swain. It was our first shirt, and we got to go. We didn't have any equipment. We had our uniforms. We didn't have any of our alert bags, any of that, chem warfare suits.
So was this like just an impromptu exercise? It was called.
Yeah, but we just got there. We didn't even know, we hadn't been issued anything. We didn't have our PRP, wasn't through, which is personal reliability, which I got on the 19th or 15th. 19th, sorry, you know better than me. And because you always hear I didn't have the PRP. I did have it. Obviously, I wouldn't have worked. That's why we were there. And the PRP is your federal background checks, and that you can work around nuclear weapons, and it's trustworthiness and all this BS, whatever. So they made us try to go out, and this kid, and me, I'm like, I BS'd my way out of it with these sergeants. I'm like, God, this is the real deal. And I go, we don't have anything. And frankly, I didn't want to get out of bed. And, I didn't want, by hell with this shit, I want to go home. And sorry, little girl there. And so that was it, my first night. And I got out of it, went back to bed. We started the next morning. Mm-hmm. We went to the Base All Ranks Club. I can remember this, and we sat there and listened to we met Malcolm Ziegler, who's Chief of Security Police from West Hartford, Connecticut. I knew. Who
turns out to be a pretty intriguing figure in the Rendlesham story.
Yeah, a CIA operative that was working under the guise of the U.S. Air Force. This is true. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Didn't know it then. I mean, my dad lived in West Hartford, and we had some in common. I thought it was all right. But they were playing some games, these guys, already, and you knew there was a funny vibe on that place. There was maybe it was all new, but there was something strange going on that base before any of the UFO stuff.
Okay, so I'm just going to move you forward.
Yeah.
So you've got onto the base. It's your first real tour.
Yep.
A couple of weeks of familiarization. Eventually, you get authorized to go on shift. Tell me about your first shift when you collected your weapon at guard mount and your first shift.
Well, just for the training, just so you know, when we get to a new base, each base has its own security procedures.
Yep.
And we had the twin bases, so we were bussed between them, so you could work at Woodbridge or Bentwaters. I never worked on Woodbridge. But I had 2 weeks of incoming training. You had to requalify on the M16 rifle that we used back then. And we had my weapon, when I first had it issued, had been used in the Tet Offensive in '68 at Da Nang.
All right, okay.
That's something.
Vietnam.
Yeah. I mean, so we're still from that era, and that was not that long before them days. 12 years old, the weapon. That's all. And so this is the era when this happens. In the incoming training on Woodbridge, we met Eric Berman, who was the PC, the British liaison. We met Don Moreland, who was the British RAF.
Squadron Leader Moreland,
yeah. We met
Base
him.
liaison, yeah.
And we were introduced to Gordon Williams, who knew him right off. Colonel Holt would lurk around the police anyway. I think he always wanted to be security police for some reason.
But had you ever been introduced to Colonel Holt prior to the events that then took place?
Not introduced, but I knew who he was.
You knew of him.
Oh, yeah.
But this is quite important.
Yeah.
Would he have known of you as a new airman on the base approaching Christmas?
At that time, probably not. He wasn't familiar with all the young ones. He'd make himself on the flight line familiar to you. Sure.
Okay, and how was Holt regarded as a senior officer?
He was all right.
He was okay.
Yeah. He was more accessible than a lot of others, and he liked the enlisted guys from what I seen, And there, I mean, once you got over there, when you'd pass an officer, because at that time we didn't have camouflage. It was still OD, olive green stuff. And we didn't have those Nazi kind of American helmets nowadays. It was the full metal jacket stuff still. I mean, it was ancient equipment. We still were dealing with Jimmy Carter. He was about to transition out, and he was not good to the military as far as budgets and equipment and support. So it was not probably a great time to be in. And so I knew who Colonel Holt was because at the incoming briefing, but he would not know us individually. No.
Which we'll come to later on, because I think that's quite a relevant point from my point of view as an investigator.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So you go on shift literally just before Christmas.
Yeah.
How many shifts would you have worked prior to you getting involved in the incident?
Right. I got passed out with my PRP. I'd been assigned to D-Flight Security. And I worked 1 week, and then I worked 4 days, and the first 2 days I was riding around with law enforcement. Yeah. And in fact,
so they just looked like cops. They weren't in combat.
They were regular street cops with police cars. We were,
combats.
We were combatants, and so we were base defenders, we're against the Russians, Ivan and all that kind of thing, because they would be to take the nuclear weapons that weren't there. And, Greenham Common was where all the CND women would chain themselves up to the fence. But in reality, RAF Bentwaters, not Woodbridge, Bentwaters, our weapons storage area had the largest backline of tactical bombs in NATO. Even though we weren't aircraft capable to fly them, F-111s would come down from Lake and Heath, pick them up, and go to FOLs, which are forward operation locations on the Cold War front line. It was the anti-tank killers we had. But these were 1 megaton blast radius battlefield-grade nuclear weapons. And
just cutting in there, because this is touching onto when I worked in the RAF.
Sure.
I for 3 of my 6 years, I worked on 2 nuclear bases. One at RAF Honington in Suffolk, believe it or not, and the other one was in RAF Larbruck in what was then West Germany, which was near the Dutch border, near a place called Wietze. And basically, did those nukes, were they ever transported by transport aircraft, and then you do a convoy into the weapons storage area?
Exactly.
All right, and you'd practice deployments in case anything happened. You'd stop and you'd all go to set positions. This is a well-drilled machine. So when people talk about, well, I'll ask you this question. We hear wild theories about Rendlesham, but I know what's real and what's not, and I also know what happens in the military in terms of nuclear weapons. Here's the question then. Some people will say that people were playing mind games with the troops guarding nuclear weapons. What do you say to that?
No way.
And that's exactly my response. Why?
No way.
Because you are live armed. I had 30 rounds, 2 clips for an SMG, so 2 clips of 30 rounds each.
Same.
For a submachine gun. And I also had a sidearm of a Browning 9mm pistol with, I think, 12 in the clip, 2 clips. So I had like 184 rounds. Now that's not just one person. When they call it guard mount, we just call it changeover. But you basically draw your weapon, get your bullets, go out, do your job, and then at the end you have to clear your weapon into usually a sand barrel, and the sergeant's looking over you and he's going clear.
Redheads.
So they check that there's no bullet in the chamber because you're live armed. So you're handing your weapons back, and they go back in the box. Next shift comes on because it's 24/7, 365 days a year. And this is important.
Very controlled. There was no free form. There was no jazz to it. It was.
So when people kind of say, "Oh well, it's just military people playing tricks," believe me, with that amount of people, and you're looking at 38 to 40 officers on shift at any one. Some are driving round, some are on the base, some are in different locations. But basically, anywhere between 30 and 40 airmen per base, per shift, drawing all this amount of bullets and firepower. Plus you'd have some with bigger machine guns because you'd practice and exercise and things like that. So people do not mess around with nuclear weapons. So when you hear these stories that fly around the internet that say, no, they were just doing mind games on the troops, it's bullshit. There is no other word for it. It just would not happen. It's too serious a game. Yeah? Maybe on training units, but certainly never on a live nuclear base. And what Larry said there is a big, big thing, because this has to be set in its context. And I talk about this afternoon in mine, but I ultimately think that Rendlesham Forest was a nuclear weapons check by UFOs. Yeah, it was a nuclear test, because hundreds of thousands of Russian troops were massing on the borders of Poland. Remember, it's still the Soviet Empire. And it looked like there may well be an invasion by Soviet troops back into Poland to squash Lech Wałęsa and his shipbuilding workers. So you have to put it in its historical context. Plus you also had the Iranian hostage crisis going on. So two major world events going on at the same time. Now, what Larry said there is really important, because he will say it, because he's not an officer, yeah, and he basically doesn't care. But what he said was there were more nuclear weapons there on that base than anywhere else in the UK, and I think you said Europe.
It was
certainly the UK.
It was the largest backline in Europe.
Okay, so it's the backline, right? Now here's the thing. You will never get somebody like Colonel Holt, who I've got to know pretty well through my association, collaboration with the film script and whatever, but he's a senior officer. General Williams, Colonel Ted Conrad, they are never going to say, well, actually, there were a load of nuclear weapons there that shouldn't be there. Why?
Well, neither will Jim Peniston or John Burroughs. So
and I don't understand their point of view, to be honest, because they're not an officer, so it's a cop-out for me, but that's them. But what I'm saying is this is significant. This is really about UFOs checking out a nuclear base at a time of world crisis, and you can see why they would, if they think that they have a vested interest in our welfare and don't want to see the planet blown up. They often turn up at nuclear bases. So the fact that they turn up for 3 successive nights is important. Because what's the motive? And that's your motive. World in crisis, nukes that aren't declared, breaking all the armament agreements, and what do we find out later? The beams were shone down, confirmed by Holt to me personally, on video, saying, yeah, he heard the radio chatter, beams going down into nuclear bunkers. So this was a test of some kind. All right, let's go back. Let's now. You've kind of got there. You've got to the base. You have familiarised yourself. Yeah. You're nicely on shift. You've basically done a week's tour so far. Yeah. And then tell me what happens on the fateful night.
We just. No.
Well, in fact, no. I don't want to go into any particular depth. But what I want to do is.
I don't do this
anymore. All right. So. Well, at what point did you first hear about UFO activity prior to the night that you got involved?
Never heard anything about. I'm sorry. I never heard anything about the 2 previous nights. I'd been on a 3-day break, and we were rotating back on, and we were swings and mids, and we went through Guard Mount. And I was assigned to P-18, which is at the end. And I've read Georgina's book, and you can spin this stuff as all you want. I was there. I was assigned. I have all my assignment stuff. And I was at the end of Bentwaters runway because we were in an alert condition. There was no rumor mill about UFOs. There was no one running around talking about UFOs. It never happened before. It never happened after. So when you hear about, and I have to say our dear friend Mr. Holt, there were no rumor mills. There was none of this. It was clamped down. Okay. Just like Bob Ball said on CNN many years ago. It was shut down. I mean, you're in the military, and when this stuff is clamped down, it's shut down. And so I had no prior knowledge of the 2 nights before, and the night before I went on, John and Jim's thing, and Ed Cabanasak, which we forget about, who was 2 weeks behind me in training and got there, Eddie was a week behind me, and then Bud Steffens. So all that happened 2 nights before the big one. I was out there the night Holt was out there. I was not with his party, but I was with people that were liaising between the two, which has been verified now by real people. And so we were assigned, I was assigned a remote post. And the post was designed in case Russian aircraft came in, or Spetsnaz, the special forces, would come down and try to seize our nukes.
On gliders.
On gliders.
This is what we got told.
Yeah.
When we're protecting nuclear weapons, if you're on the weapon storage area, which is fenced off and there's the hot row inside, they'd say they can come in on gliders and land
well, they would have
machine guns and take you by surprise. That's what they used to say.
They so where I first knew anything, we had the weapons, the tower, if you're familiar with Bentwaters now, and that's still there. And they have SpeakAds guys which work in the nuclear alarms. I never worked in the WSA. Those IDs I did not have yet. I had not qualified to work in the WSA, and that is true. But I was qualified to work all status and alert areas, all high risk areas, but not the WSA because I hadn't had that formal training, though I had worked with guys shadowing them in there for a night. In my previous week for familiarization. It was a whole different game than nuclear, and even though we trained it in Texas and even having convoys attacked. So I never even saw a nuclear convoy. I knew what was in there, though. I saw the bomb. I really did. It was something. But in reality, we had on the wall in there, it said better on our fence, on their fence than ours. Because Greenham Common, they used to laugh at all them women. There was nothing there. There was nothing.
The grand deception.
Now you got to understand with Rendlesham, and I've paid the price more than any of these guys because I'm the whistleblower. There was no one that was. I didn't join the fray in '83. I was the fray. There was no one. It was me, and that's not waving my flag. It's the truth. And I've seen it nowadays that's kind of accepted, but God, it took years. Everyone wanted to be no, it was me. The documents came out because of me. The audio came out because of me. The names of the witnesses were identified because of me. And I kept it burning for years when I have to say the UFO community in this country, my country, did nothing. They've never been supportive. I'm not talking about people like yourselves, okay? I'm talking about the giant egos that this thing is, because, the government don't need to do nothing to anybody. We're contained already. Here we are. And so reality is I started to hear transmissions. We had 4 channels of security police radios. It can get boring out there. It was a clear night. It was very clear and in the 30s. And I'm from the East Coast. It was it was kind of warm for me, and I'm hearing them, those lights are back again, and that was coming over the radio. And then some guys did start joking around on the radios. And I remember that and looking, and I saw a deer. You've heard me say it or read it in our book or whatever, but we had lower fences than you see at Bentwaters nowadays. They're about 5 feet tall, believe it or not, even then, And it was before the Haji and all this stuff going on now. So, bang, these deers jumping over all the fence and running.
So something had spooked them.
Well, yeah, we're quite a distance, but I didn't see anything, but I heard those lights are back, and I'm like, what the heck is this? And then I was picked up, just like I've always said, I'm always changing my story. I've never changed anything, ever. I held a few things back in the early days because
you made some mistakes.
Well, I wanted other people to come and say it before I looked like a complete. Remember, this is 1982, late 82 when I went public, and you were just short of tarred and feathered for saying MUFON's public opinion. You go to a MUFON event or a conference where I first spoke. And you'd have Bruce Maccabee. As much as I like him, he's a smart guy, world-class piano player, by the way. And I knew Alan Hynek, man. That's how long I've been around. And they'd show a picture and they'd try to convince you that there's lights in the sky over a house wasn't a Christmas tree. Well, you know it isn't. But you talked about a non-human presence. I mean, Bud Hopkins was new as far as the public and then. It was very hard about this abduction stuff. So none of this, it was a different era. A lot of you weren't even born yet, some of you, or you were infants. And some of you, and America had a whole different view of the subject than what happened here. England was always very conservative and a different kind of view of things, and that's fine. That's fine how people are. But the events, what I seen on Capel Green, which left physical evidence. In fact, the only evidence of any event to happen in that whole forest comes from what we've identified on a spot where I pointed to 8 years after the fact and said it happened there. Because I wouldn't forget. it was night, but I can remember the stand of trees where certain parties have now moved their multiple moving of landing sites. This seems to be acceptable to you folks. And when I say you folks, I'm not saying you. I'm saying at large. You've got a new religion coming to you. Get ready. Enjoy it. I ain't part of it at all. I won't be, and I'll leave it at that. If I move my site where I know this thing happened to me and others, real name people, if I moved it an inch, I'd have had my fingers cut off, run out of town. But other two individuals seemingly can move their things at convenience and at will, and this is fine for everybody. This is acceptable. Because they were, well, John Burroughs was an airman first class, my same rank back then. They're always pushing out, we're retired and all. John Burroughs was my same rank. He's my age. Peniston had been in since 73, so he'd been around. I'm not going to sit here and play the violin on John and Jim. You make your own minds up. Their thing ain't out. They have the answers for all of us. I look forward to answers. I have no answers. I probably disappointed a lot of people over the years, but I was never here for that. There was a reason why I did what I did. You ask me questions, Gary, because I just start coming out of a 1980 bag, you know.
Let me just qualify something.
The real events, they happen.
Let me just qualify something that Larry said there. Now, as an investigator of the case, I look at all sides without making judgments. And of course, I've got to know Holt pretty well, but I've also met Larry over the years. I've met John and Jim, and everybody's got their own opinions. But I try to look at the evidence. Now, there is what Larry said there is significant. But I'll explain that. When he says that he pointed to a spot, he's referring to 1988 when he goes back with Peter Robbins, co-author of Left at Eastgate, and it's the first time, am I right in saying, that you'd been back there? So
I tried to go in 85, my first marriage. I decide, our honeymoon, it's in our book, you've read it, but if you read our book, and I took the first wife, we got to go on our honeymoon to Bentwaters.
Not a good move, really.
And this was this thing, a place I couldn't wait to get the heck out of. And I'll never forget, in fact, everyone, when our plane left Lakenheath, the plane cheered, man. We were just so happy to get the hell out of there. And but I took her, and it was muddy, so we couldn't get out to the site. And she was pretty much thinking of a divorce by then, I think. And then in 88, Peter and I came over for our first research trip for the book. Our book took 9.5 years, and we went out to the site. I knew exactly where I was going. I had no question ever.
What Peter says to me, and I've obviously got to know Peter pretty well, is that when Larry went to the forest, from the forest, and you see the farmer's field, what impressed Peter was it was there. An automatic reflex. It wasn't, I'm not sure it was there. And that's what impressed Peter, like an auto response. Now, it just so happened that 8 years later, the point where Larry had pointed to was discoloured. Now, let me distinguish what is evidence here, because if in a police investigation you have what's called chain of evidence, i.e., if you pass me the murder weapon, I've got to put it and seal it up and then track it before it gets into court. Everybody who handles it, forensic tests, blood tests, before it turns up in court a year later, every man and his dog who was ever investigated that particular knife or gun will have had to sign an exhibit label, which means you pass it to me, I pass it to you, and it's all name, date, and time. Yep. Well, of course, we don't have that with Rendlesham. So what we have is an anomalous soil sample. But let me put this into the context, because it's important. Larry, Peter was there.
We've had the soil analysis
I'm going
twice by labs.
The first time Peter gets there, and Larry's saying it's there, the soil's a different colour. So he has some like film containers. He bags some soil up, basically. But when he took it to the lab, there wasn't enough to really get a definitive result. Right. So it was a further 2 years and another visit back and a load more soil gathered up that went to the forensic lab. But this is what came out of the forensic test that would stand up as a piece of documentary evidence in a court of law. You could produce this in a court of law about Rendlesham Forest. that soil came back as highly anomalous in the sense that it was almost turned to silica. Another word for silica is glass. So it had been irradiated. So where Larry said something was, mist, spaceship, whatever, something in the spot where he said it was very anomalous. It wouldn't absorb water to the control samples in the area away from it, just a normal soil sample. So what this points out to is that in that particular spot where Larry went there, what you can say evidentially is that something highly anomalous took place. Now what you can't do is date it back to late December 1980.
No.
But it's a hell of a coincidence, is it not? That where somebody says it happened there, and we have this strange, anomalous soil sample that would stand up in a court of law. So you haven't got the chain of evidence, but it is anomalous, and that's still important, okay? All right? Now, what I want to do is, because, as I say, you have told the story a million times.
Well, since 1983, you know,
okay.
So I'm way beyond what happened when I was in what did or did not happen. There's a lot of perceptions. I view things differently now at a 52-year-old than a 19, like we all do.
Yep.
And though there is no doubt I will be, because there's so much more. If you want to go beyond this and how I came out, how Rendlesham came out, and what really went on, you know, with people, who paid prices and who rode the surfboard of creating new religions.
Let's talk about you, Larry. Let's talk about you.
Yeah, okay. Whatever, you know, because the incident bogs me down. It bores me to even. I can't make you see and go through what I went through and feel what I went through and others, and I only can think of me. I'm not going to speak for other people. But go ahead, man. You know.
Like I said at the start, most people are familiar with Larry, if not everybody in the room, and his story. Larry, whether people like it or not, is an integral part of Rendlesham because he's the original whistleblower. His story, highly controversial, is attacked by Colonel Holt, was attacked by John Burroughs and attacked by Jim Penniston. But here's an interesting thing. In UFO Truth magazine, the 3rd issue, it was basically Rendlesham themed. And I asked people to give me articles. Colonel Holt did me a piece, very sceptical of the binary codes and Penniston, which I'll touch on later on in the day. But in terms of Larry, what is important is that everything that happened to him, like the others, was at a major price to his life. If you had to sum up your life after the incident, how would you sum it up? Your life since? Big question.
Well, I had no idea where all this stuff would go, and you have to understand. I mean, a lot of these guys, we're all getting up there. I'm the youngest end of the witnesses, you know, and a lot of guys don't talk. Many did years ago. I have a lot of backup, guys that were with me. I was not with John and Jim. I was not with Holt's group, though Holt does know what happened to us, and I'd say it right to his face. I've met Holt. I traveled to see Holt 20 years ago, and I sat with him, and we went, that's a whole rigmarole, you know. And I would not change one thing. You know, I'm proud of what I did. Someone needed to do it. The first person I told about this after the events thing that happened to me and others on that 3rd night, the same night the whole audio was made, though I'm not with that crew, I can tell you where they were. I knew where they were. The end of the day, by that morning, the next morning, before we were debriefed, I ran and called my mother. And I called her from a base public phone with Greg Battram, who John and Jim attack also. John and Jim attack everybody. They're a band of brothers. I've never heard more BS in my life. Well, I do look at people like brothers that went through these things. I look at the guy that this has not been, I would wonder what Mr. Holt would say since he was in command of this person, that shot himself in the mouth and killed himself because of this, because he was put back on flight. See, a lot of people thought it was the devil. In fact, Holtz talked about that many years ago. So you wonder what motivates people. I know UFOs exist. I know there's something going on. Now, there's an underground alien base aspect. Now, if you read our book, you'll find out that I'm probably talking about an extreme after-the-fact mind control thing that was laid on us. Not using sodium pentothal, it was sodium amethol, which is more lethal and is more effective in extreme things to make you sound like a rambling. This happened to me, but then this did. And I was I cover all of this in Left at Eastgate. If you've never read our book, and it's updated in 2005, you can get it on Amazon. I happen to have 2 copies here. I just had them if anyone wants one. But you can get it, and you can see what happened to me. But the reality is, there's never been money in this. Yeah, you get the great people you get to meet, and some of the videos friends make for me. Oh, we won't go there, David. But hilarious. I've never laughed harder. I've never been angrier about any pursuit in my life. I've never been more heartbroken than to see things go on. And no one has ever, in the whole infrastructure of this subject, and I'll say it if no one else is going to say it, has ever, ever, ever done what I did, being a military witness, ever. And being an authentic military witness, and no one has ever lost their United States passport for doing what I did, and having to have a former U.S. Attorney General under 2 presidents, who was also Frank Serpico's lawyer, the New York cop, you remember the movie with Pacino, who happened to I had to get it back for me. I have radiation damage and exposure from this, as do others. We have health problems now I worry about is coming from this thing, that I was close to, whatever it is. We do not know, and we're getting older. And I will tell you that this was not by design. I do not have a high regard for ufology and ufologists. Tim, I love you. I mean, Tim's a legend. He took me to Abbey Road Studios for my 35th birthday. What a devil. I'll never forget it. It was the joy of my life. See, I would never have had that experience without doing what I did. In 80, I called my mother, and I said, within hours, you're 19, you call your mother. She's 81. She'd tell you the same now. And she said, I got cut off on the phone. This is a matter of record. It happened to me. And so the first person I chose to lie to, if you like psychology, was my mother, not ufology. So my mother was probably the first person in the States to do it. But there's a huge price with this stuff. I'm not an entertainer at all. I'm a dad,
Just let me intervene there, because no.
I don't do this anymore.
No. This is important, because as a former detective, one of the things that's important is what's called evidence of early report. For example, if a woman is raped, one of the credibility things that is often looked at is, who does the victim tell first? Is it an instantaneous response to the ring a friend or whatever? And it's class of evidence of early report. Now, what Larry is saying is he's seen something traumatic, don't understand it, but what does he do? He seeks kind of a comfort to somebody who he can relate to, who's your parents, you don't have to relate to. It's just an instant thing. And so he chose to inform his mother. And that's kind of an evidence of early report that something significant happened. We're not going into Q&A now. You can maybe at the end.
I'm here all day, brother. You can ask me anything you want, man.
I just wish you would actually tell us exactly what you saw.
I ain't going to do that today. I don't mean any disrespect. Wrote a book about it. I've been public 30 years, man. No offense. I don't do it no more. I enjoy the company, the pleasure of meeting all you. Gary asked me to fill in.
I'll paraphrase it, because we've talked about
this. I detest playing this role now. I've outgrown it. I'm at peace. I'm a dad. I love my son.
Well, let's talk about that.
If I do a good job with him, I've won. That's it.
Let's talk about that, because the reality is.
I want to get into telling them about the human thing. You go
so that's what I'm coming to
aliens.
Now. That's what I'm coming to. No, this is the bit that I'm moving to now. Now, we've talked, and we said we'll talk about anything. All right, and you said, we'll talk about anything. Now, you got into drugs. You got into alcohol. How much?
Not all at once.
No, but how much was that as a result of finding yourself as a young man caught up in a weird experience?
Right. Well, this is good. As you get, when I wrote our book with Peter Robbins, And it did very well. It's still in print 16, 17 years later. The first people I knew I couldn't BS was my family, because they'd be reading it. And my parents would call a spade in a minute. My mother said to Bud Hopkins, the late Bud Hopkins, many years ago in '84 in a phone interview, when I kind of first knew Bud wanted to speak to my mother, because I have a history with this something going on. And she said, Bud, something happened to that boy. He was not the same guy. My sister recently said on one of these crazy Facebook argument sites with fake profiles and people, it's not my world, guys. I'm from the 70s. I'm happy living in there. And she got on. She said, I've known my brother for 50 years, and he was not the same guy when he came back. When I came back home, I was, and I'm honorably discharged, I was a train wreck. There's a billion aspects. There's 33 years of angst with this thing, and ups and downs and details and things that I know very well, and I don't need to think or look at notes. I never had to. I lived it. I can't, but as far as other things, I ran with a music industry crowd in life. I've had ups and downs with employment and careers, but I was kind of an outlaw, and you had to be an outlaw to do what I did. I was a whistleblower in a sense that I absolutely was furious with the powers that be that suppress and repress and do horrific crap to people that go through this subject. Now, there is a loony fringe and a paranoid fringe. I don't believe the government's hiding behind bushes with me, though I have met Mossad. I've met all kinds of people over the years, for real, that were interested in what did happen. The intelligence guys that were put on me in the mid-'80s were wondering if there was a Russian connection, and I was some kind of a spooky kooky, you know. This is all real, people, all that. It's not the unified conspiracy. I do not believe September 11th was done by George Bush either. I had family that survived it. I'm a very grounded kind of guy. So I got into a wild outlaw kind of biker lifestyle, but all kinds, you know. I'm divorced twice. I'm a winner. I'm a loser. I'm a this and that and the other. But what I did do, and no one ever has done it, is go through an alleged event like this, come out, report it through a chain of weird circumstances. I didn't seek to be a public guy. There was no such thing as Rendlesham Forest incident. It was called the Bentwaters incident, by the way, 30 years ago. It was never RFI until, what's her name, Georgina did the book, her thing. And so, end of the day, no one did what I did. I got it out. I got the document out for you. Hall has had a hard-on for me ever since I got that out because his name's attached to it. He wanted it burnt. I'm the guy that attached him to the events. The audio tape got out, the names, people chucked the caro, and see. Remember, this is nothing new since Jim Peniston.
Tell the story about how the tape and the document, how the tape got out.
Well, the document was a big deal. That was really big. I explained Light's memo. I had given all the particulars, never remembered the exact date, knew it was after Christmas, before New Year's 1980.
But you'd never seen the Holt memo, had you?
Well, of course not. However, I wrote, a week before Charles Holt wrote that memo, which is reproduced in our book, I wrote a letter to my mother. And I wrote a kind of a roundabout kind of brief, putting myself one step out of it. A guy I know told me this. And I have the actual letter, and I sent it to my mom. My mother responded to me the day after Holt authored his letter. I got her response because we had APOs, and the mail went quick for the Air Force. And my mother said, well, at the end, and I have the actual letters, and it says, what you and others saw must have been quite something. And as you know, Larry, it was a UFO, something like that. And so I probably documented it before Holt did, a week, and I have the actual letters, the postmarks, everything.
Holt didn't want to write his letter. He was pretty much forced.
Well, I didn't want to write everything that happened. I just wanted my mother to know, as you know, on the phone, I got cut off. Well, this is what happened, but I was just, I said, I can't tell you everything, Ma. I'll tell you when I get home. They read the mail. I was such an idiot, because I said, I can't tell you in the mail. They read it. All the stupid things. But then I'm running around the base with Steve LaPlume, a lot of guys, and Bastin's and me, and how we got it out. Adrian Bastin's and me, who has just come out again and verified, yes, I was with him.
I'll talk about that.
And by the way, I want to say, Colonel Holt, myself, Peniston Burroughs, and whoever, Nick, I think, was on there, and Peter, on Paulino's radio show in 2010, And Holt we were all on the show, and Holt, I finally said, would you quit your bullshit saying I wasn't there? He goes, all right, Larry, you were there. But you have to remember, Colonel Holt they used to say I was never in the Air Force. They used to say Adrian Bustinza wasn't there. They said John Burroughs wasn't there. I mean, I'm the one that was consistently got at, because I was the most consistently trying to keep the event in. It wasn't about me, trying to keep it in your minds that this happened. Look into it for yourself. Now, it's become a multiverse cottage industry with I have had people tell me what happened to me that weren't even born then. Well, and then when you say, well, I beg to differ, because I was
actually there.
I was kind of there, and they're like, well, that's a matter, it's, you're just not seeing it right. And I go, well, and then I had someone tell me recently, I go, Larry, I've had people apologize to me on this nutty Facebook thing, saying, I used to really, be against you, and now things have turned around, and I read your book through different eyes, and I'm like, whose eyes did you read my damn book through? I sound like a serial killer. You give him back his eyes. So the people you meet and stuff, it's very frustrating stuff, almost as much as being married, and but they keep pulling you back. I have spoken around the world. I've been to Japan in the 80s. I have spoken at the United Nations. Not the General Assembly, but a special assembly. I did the actual disclosure conference in 2001, just before September 11th. I was very proud to do it. And we lobbied Congress and Senate for a week. It wasn't just that press conference. It was a lot more to it. And I've had great opportunities to meet amazing people that just, the government, the politicians don't know. They know something's going on, but they want to know. They're not all sitting on something. It's nonsense. But everyone has an opinion, like you know what. So, but I'm very proud. I know we're pressed for time, and I'm very proud of what I did in the long run. I'm not going to get bogged down with was there beings? There was something there that was alive, as far as I know. See, my thing is, things were plugged in, but after the fact, what I saw in that field, I marked an oak tree which just fell down a week ago from what I hear in the windstorm. That was my marker, because the way it was lit by this phenomena. The farmer's house had a light on to the right. I can tell you exactly which. There's two windows. I know which window it was lit. The dogs are barking. I can tell you where the light comes in. And now the stand of the trees, where certain people have communicated with us from the future and have been given the grand design of life. And maybe they have. My ex goes, well, maybe he did. And I go, well, why didn't you go just marry him? And he deserves you. And it's stunning. But at the end of the day, and then you can go, just let me do this. I'm taking over. No, I'm not. The bottom line is, I use a lot of humor in what I do. Yeah, I got in some wild stuff in my life, and I'm not going to blame Rendlesham. It might have been but I was a good boy before the Air Force. I was a good guy. And I stayed a good guy, but I was a party. A lot of you guys know I used to be a pretty heavy partying guy. And I think a lot of times when I go to these conferences, I would really go over the top, because I think I was exposing myself to things that caused a lot of psychological unease and a lot of, because I live a normal life. I'm a working stiff like everyone else, right? I'm not a millionaire, none of this stuff. I'm on the new Sean Ryder thing. I haven't seen it yet. I like the first one. But so I'm out there, but my role is to bring, particularly the way things have gone since 2010. I think a lot of this event, I'm very sad to say, has been derailed by an agenda. I don't know what that is, but it's pretty unnerving. But if it works for some people, I think I disappoint people in some ways, because I don't have answers on Rendlesham. I have seen things that are spectacular with this phenomenon that had nothing to do with Rendlesham. And I was very lucid. Rendlesham's like a dream, okay? And there were problems with narcotic intervention after by the intelligence community. Not AFOSI, it was Armed Forces Security Services and NSA. The Department of Navy were very involved. I was not debriefed by AFOSI, though they did try to really give me a hard time after. And then I found out they had a spook stuck into an office named Mark Reese with me. And all these grand brothers of mine go, oh yeah, Mark was Air Force Investigations. That guy was assigned to me, man. I'm telling him all this happened. He goes, well, you shouldn't. I was raising hell on that base. So I left. I stole my records. My records are classified. You know, Jim Pennison putting out, my records are classified and all this and all that. Mine have been on record classified since '83. I had to bring lawyers to D.C. to see if I could see them. And this is open matter. They should be in St. Louis. They're not. And so everything I did, I'm very proud. When our book came out after 9.5 years, about $100,000 of my own money, I was the financier of it. So I must be nuts, because no guarantee you're ever going to get published, right? We got totally ripped off by our publisher, Publishers Group West. We have a nice little Dutch fellow that publishes it now. It's still out there. It's updated. And at the end of the day, when we were touring our book back in '97, and I'll tell you, let's have a happy kind of resolution, because it's not always been happy. And it's not always fun in the early days. You know, people, you know, back then they didn't have the internet, but there were newsletters, you know, and, you know, I knew Alan. I know all these kind of people you think about.
How did it make you feel in the early days when people like Pennison and Burroughs would attack you?
They weren't there in the early days. They weren't around.
So you were on your own?
I was on my own for a whole decade before they popped up, and they did Unsolved Mysteries. It was only John. Jim was still in. And then John, I used to do gigs with John out in Arizona. People don't know that. I'm sitting with John Burroughs. I almost said John Lennon. John Burroughs up in L.A. at this guy Kurt Brubaker's house with John in tears, almost half dead because of things that I'm not going to say here, but John knows the score. He wasn't allowed out to our site on my night because he was off duty. He was back at the car. The guy that drove him out there will tell you he never left the car. And that's a guy named... But the real good thing it is, we taught our book in '97. I met a lot of you for the first time back then. We had been coming to England before that. But no, I was the only one. And Whitley Strieber in '85, because I had been misrepresented already in a couple books by '85, man. He said, you should write your own. I'm like, okay. No idea. And I needed a co-author, and I had one guy that was a total stick-in-the-mud, MUFON kind of guy. I'm like, no humanity involved. And I always tell these researchers, without us, witnesses, there wouldn't be any ufology.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, it's theories, you know, and we all have theories and ideas. I don't pretend to know where that's from. I think it is off Earth for sure. But at the end, we're touring. I met this girl on the door in Liverpool. We fought. No one wants to send you to Liverpool back then, publishers. And I said, I want to go do a gig in Liverpool, man. We had a major book tour. And we got over there and did this conference, and there was some kind of neo-Nazi there. And it was really, I'm not kidding, this guy, I wanted to right in his face from the stage. He's like, you with me? I'm like, mein Führer, sit down before I hurt you. And I met this girl. I said, write me, come visit me. She did visit me. Back and forth, this and that. Liverpool women are some of the most beautiful women in the world, and the most deadly. I will tell you, dangerous broads. Anyway, we had this little guy named, and I moved over here, and she was going to move back. Anyway, I had my son Dennis, and, well, she had him. I helped. And so Dennis, and I'm an older dad, and my son's now taller than me, and my mom's like 81 now, Joanne. And I go, oh, you know, he's an inch taller than me already. And she goes, Larry, that is not hard. So my mother, ooh. So the best thing is I'm the winner. John and Jim can have their thing. I wish them well. I wish them good health, because I worry about that with all of us. But I won because I have this. It changed my whole life. It is one of the scariest things, more than UFOs, anything, is raising children, I've come to find out, with this world they live in.
Would it be fair to say that the birth of your son, in a sense, has had a dramatic effect on your life and how you perceive the world?
Well, I've relaxed a lot. You know, I want to be around. I want to be. He's 12. I took him to the States in New York in May, you know, and see his grandma, and we went up the Empire State Building. My brother-in-law's a federal agent. He loves this Rendlesham stuff. He goes, God damn. He goes, thank God they get a security clearance every year. And he says, I thank God the one question they never ask about is brother-in-laws. But he said he does suspect that they do know things. He was stationed with Holt. My brother-in-law was security police, too, in the States. And the end of the day, I have this great guy, you know, he's like my pal, and he almost came today, but he had an issue at high school the other day, and his mother wouldn't let him. So, I won. So I used to be a very angry guy, very reactive, drank a lot, did all, you know, I'll have a cocktail nowadays, but I have to be careful. because I'm a alcoholic, but a binge drinker, not a I never even drink at home. It's very true. I have to be honest about myself. I fell into the drug thing. No one pushed me into it. I was a type A. Addictive. I had to be up. And then you go in this massive, I can tell you all about this stuff. My son goes, Dad, did you ever do drugs? I go, absolutely. And I'll tell you exactly what it will do. It will kill everything you love, then it will kill you. And so I don't think my son will even look at a cigarette. And it sounds weird. A lot of people, back in the old days, there's stuff in my book. I remember Tim, you reading a manuscript many years ago. Tim Good, a dear friend, man I respect so much. Truly a great man. And he said to me, I'm not sure. There was a certain part, I was a bit of an abusive guy in my first marriage, once, but once is too many. And he said, I'm not sure you want that in there. I said, Tim, if I don't do it, my family are going to call bullshit on me. So I had to show the destructive thing. I'm not blaming all my failings on Rendlesham. That would be a cop-out. We all have faults. I think it has contributed in a lot of ways. I don't regret one thing. But no matter what. I know what John and Jim is coming with them, and I was at the 2010 Woodbridge conference, and I was as shocked as anyone. And I will tell you, when Jim mentioned about, I am a very loyal guy, even though they haven't been very good to me. Though I have wonderful emails for Jim after that saying, what a pleasure to reconnect with you. I'm like, shit, he's the guy that told me the morning after my thing to shut the F up in the breakfast table and the security police table. He did, and he admitted.
Because you were talking about the incident.
No, Steve Longero, just retired L.A. County Sheriff, just said to me, he looked at me and goes, what the hell just happened? It was Peniston, who says he wasn't on the base, was sitting right there, and he said, Warren, shut the F up. And I looked, and I almost threw my tray at the guy. We weren't friends even then, you gotta understand. And he said, I was just looking out for you. Please stop looking out for me, all of you, and because it hurts. And bottom line is that Jim, when he announced the binary, which he decided to announce, even John didn't know about it. Nick saw his opportunities. Elton Pope. There ain't a funeral he won't play. I like Nick. I've known Nick many years, but he's an opportunist, and I really hope he doesn't burn his bridge on this Thursday. But bottom line is, the audience, some of you may have been there, I thought Jim was going to get lynched. He was standing, I'm sitting here, and there were people furious at him for a million reasons, because he's not the most open. And I went to his defense, if any of you remember.
Yes, if you watch the YouTube video.
I did, because I'm thinking, because I know what it's like. I've never been ganged up by either people accept or reject. Years ago, well, this guy's nuts, or people. I have always had tons of support, and it's always been where it needs to be, first of all. I'm not from a UFO family, none of that stuff, but I've always had good support. But I will tell you that I went to the guy's defense, because I'm thinking, these guys have no idea what they're putting themselves forward to, and I don't regret doing that. He would not do it for me.
No.
So that's who I am as a person. And I'm very proud to be the dad of a great son. And I bring him up. People always get bored with me, because that's all I talk about nowadays. He's just a workaholic. He amazes me if he stays out of trouble a little bit. So, but he's a good boy.
I just want to, before we wrap up, because we're working to a schedule, but what I want to put on record is that Adrian Bustinza, who basically did publicly go on the record for a brief time, and then has basically not been on the record for a long time, don't want to get involved. But for the third issue of the magazine, via Peter Robbins, via Ronnie Dugdale, I was trying to, who have contacts with him, we was trying to get a definitive statement, a modern statement from Adrian Bustinza. Now, he was the guy who was part of Holt's team, but he was also the guy that kept going to and from. Lighthorse could go anywhere around the base.
He brought me out to the site.
Yeah, right. So he's an integral figure. Well, for the magazine, what he says is he basically doesn't want to get involved. He's protective of his brothers. He's sad that there's all this infighting about the case. But significantly, he says, Larry Warren was there. And he confirmed he was there that night.
And wearing a yellow dress.
Right, Larry, this is a little bit different. I hope you've enjoyed it.
I have, man. You know,
Now,
it's just relaxed. I'm not all wound up anymore. It will be what it will be.
Well, you're
The
changing.
future's not ours to see unless you're Jim Peniston.
But what I want to say, and I've always defended you, and I've defended you against Melinda Moulton Howe and Colonel
She's
Hall,
tough.
is that you are the original whistleblower, and I think he deserves a round of applause, because this case would not be here if it weren't for Larry.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, guys. I'm here all day. You would ask me anything. That's all right. It's an honor to be here. Good luck with the magazine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, if you want to ask a question, I'm sure one or two maybe, but it's your break time now. So we're next on to the next lecturer at 11:35. Okay? Was that okay for you? Bit interesting? Yeah. All right. Thanks very much. Right, so have a nice little break.